My wife had a small affair with her boss, and all the time she thought I didn't know anything. She was wrong. While she was spending time with her lover, I was preparing a plan of retaliation. I'm not a vindictive person, but when it comes to my family, nothing can stop me. Last July, I made the painful discovery of my wife's infidelity, and since then, I've been enduring unimaginable anguish. I never had any suspicions at first. I couldn't conceive that my wife would betray me in such a way. For our 8 years of marriage, I was blissfully unaware. The renowned psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross proposed that when faced with the prospect of death or other profound tragedy, individuals go through a sequence of emotional stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I remembered learning this in a psychology conference during university. Denial marks the beginning, and I was firmly entrenched in it. If Mary had truly been unfaithful, that would mean the end of our marriage, but I fought to accept this reality. I wondered if I would go through all the stages of grief for the loss of our love, and if, by the time I reached acceptance, the pain and suffering would last indefinitely. I met Mary while studying computer science in college. I was forced to take an English class as part of the general education curriculum. At first, I had little enthusiasm for diving into the works of poets and old authors. My mind seemed to be focused only on computer code and social events. As a stereotypical computer science enthusiast, I was tall and somewhat awkward. Academically, I was average, never excelling in sports or extreme activities. However, I was good at tutoring in computers, which made me recognizable among my peers, although they often didn't remember my name. My romantic history was limited to brief encounters with Pauline, a friend from high school. We spent a couple of months together before she moved away. My computer science buddies and I often shared stories of imagined romantic exploits, daydreaming about classmates we admired. Meeting Mary was a turning point in my life. Sitting next to her in English class, I found myself captivated by her deep hazel eyes. I couldn't look away, lost in their depth throughout the entire lesson. It wasn't until she was leaving that I noticed the rest of her features. Mary had shoulder-length blonde hair with a soft wave, a small nose, and lips that always seemed to curve upward. She wasn't as tall as me, maybe around 5 feet 5 inches, though I wasn't particularly experienced at judging these things. I couldn't help but notice how well she filled out her shirt, and her lower half was wrapped in well-fitted jeans that perfectly accentuated her figure. To me, she was perfect. From then on, I made a conscious effort to sit next to her every day. After about a month, she started a conversation, noticing my calculus books and asking if I could tutor her in college algebra, a subject she was struggling with and needed to pass to graduate. I would have agreed to anything she asked. We began meeting at the library on Tuesdays and Thursdays after class for study sessions. Despite my attempts to stay focused, having the most beautiful girl next to me turned my brain to mush. Still, it seemed to work, as Mary ended up getting a B on her midterm, much to her delight. When she found out, she couldn't contain her joy, jumping up and hugging me. The feeling of her kiss on my cheek made me feel like I was in paradise. Then I said something completely unexpected. "Would you like to see a movie on Friday?" "Sure." "What time?" Wait, did she just say yes? I floated back to my dorm. The following week was a blur. I even went shopping for a new pair of Dockers and a polo shirt. My nerdy friends teased me endlessly, but I took it in stride. I was anxiously counting down the minutes until our date. Somehow, Friday night arrived. Our first date was to see the latest Halloween movie, not exactly high-level entertainment. It was your typical horror film with gore, dismemberments, and cliché characters. I thought she might cling to me out of fear, but she didn't seem too fazed. Nevertheless, we had a great time. Mary and I must have hit it off because she invited me out again after our next date. From then on, we became a couple. Surprisingly, we shared many interests. We liked the same movies, read similar books, and had a mutual love for certain foods. After a few months, I found myself deeply in love. As final exams approached, I was convinced she felt the same. We were happy. Just before Christmas break, while lying in her bed, I confessed my love, telling her that she was the best thing that had ever happened to me. She smiled and reciprocated, saying, "I love you too." Life felt perfect. Even though we didn't have any classes together in the spring semester, we continued studying together in the library every day after class, picking up where we left off after the holidays. Our love only grew stronger with each passing week. We spent spring break together, renting a cabin by the lake. Though I had plans for hiking and fishing, we ended up staying inside the cabin the entire week. On the last night, I got down on one knee and proposed. She accepted. 3 months later, we graduated, and 5 months after that, we were married. After finishing school, I got a job in cybersecurity. Our company specialized in integrating security software into the computer systems of small businesses with 10 to 50 workstations. My responsibility was to write code to facilitate communication between different systems. My supervisor was Bob. Bob had founded the company a decade ago with just 2 employees. Through various mergers and acquisitions, the company grew to around 50 employees and flourished. Bob wasn't just a competent boss, but also a valuable mentor. Approximately 5 years after I joined, Bob received an offer to sell the company. He explained that a major venture capital firm in the city was interested in our position in the small business market to complement their larger computer division. The financial incentives were too tempting to pass up, so he sold the company. However, Bob remained as the manager, ensuring that all of us kept our jobs. The transition was smooth, with minimal disruptions to our daily routine. We rarely saw the new owners, and Bob continued to oversee operations in his established way. Shortly after graduating, Mary got a job as an office manager for Dr. Hubert, a dentist. Her supervisor was an elderly, kind dentist who seemed like the stereotypical absent-minded professor, complete with the comical habit of constantly looking for his glasses. Despite his perpetually confused demeanor, Dr. Hubert possessed exceptional dental skills, attracting patients from far and wide due to his reputation for excellence in dentistry, provided they could get an appointment. When Mary started working there, the office was in disarray. Bills weren't being paid, files were getting lost, and the billing systems were outdated. It was chaos. Mary took charge of organizing and improving the office, achieving remarkable results. In 3 years, Dr. Hubert's practice had undergone a transformation, becoming the envy of the region. Revenues increased, staff turnover ceased, morale soared, and even Dr. Hubert's appearance improved. Mary was credited for all of this, and I couldn't have been more proud of her. After we got married, Mary and I settled into a small apartment near my workplace. We made the most of every inch of space, creating memories in every corner. We both agreed to focus on advancing our careers before starting a family. Each year, we took a vacation around our anniversary. In the beginning, our budget was tight, so we often retreated to our cabin by the lake. Over time, our vacations became more luxurious, culminating in a trip to Disney World in Florida one year. After 5 years in the apartment, we decided it was time to look for a house. After searching for a couple of months, we found a cozy home with enough space for our future family. We moved in and once again filled every room with our love and intimacy. Approximately 7 years later, Mary came home from work full of enthusiasm. The impressive management and operational efficiency she had demonstrated at Dr. Hubert's practice had caught the attention of some influential executives. These executives, who were patients of Dr. Hubert, had taken note of the remarkable transformation in the office and shared their favorable impressions with Dr. Hubert himself. In turn, Dr. Hubert gave a glowing recommendation of Mary's contributions. One of the executives then extended a job offer to Mary. We deliberated over it that night and for several days afterward. A crucial consideration arose about how accepting the offer might impact our family plans. I had the feeling that such a career move might delay our plans to start a family for a significant amount of time. Financially, there wasn't an urgent need to accept the offer, especially given the familial bond Mary had formed with Dr. Hubert. On the other hand, Mary presented a contrasting viewpoint, emphasizing the potential career advancement that the offered role could provide. She proposed postponing our family plans for a short period, assuring me that she would manage any perceived setbacks. I found myself with little choice but to agree. A month later, Mary took on the role of personal assistant to Dana Larson, the vice president of finance at Cascade Capital. Unbeknownst to me at the time, Cascade Capital was the venture capital firm that ultimately owned the company I was already working for. At first, I didn't notice any change in our relationship. Although our intimacy decreased, I attributed it to the irregular hours that she and her boss kept. Sometimes she had to attend meetings with him late into the night, leaving her exhausted when she came home. However, over time, our intimate life deteriorated even more. Despite my attempts to reconnect with Mary, she rejected all of my advances. I don't recall us being intimate in the 2 months leading up to the awards dinner. The idea that she was being unfaithful seemed so foreign to me that it didn't even cross my mind. I discovered Mary was having an affair with her boss on the day of her company's annual awards dinner. I couldn't believe it. Every year, her company hosted a dinner to celebrate the achievements of the previous year and recognize key figures. We had been invited to attend. As we got ready to leave, I was still struggling to accept that Mary was being unfaithful. Mentally, I reviewed the past few months, but I couldn't recall any signs. Our love for each other was deep. I trusted her completely and never doubted her loyalty. In hindsight, I realized I might have been blinded by love. I needed concrete proof of Mary's infidelity, something I could witness with my own eyes. So, I set aside my doubts and focused on getting ready for the dinner. I observed Mary closely as she prepared, taking note of every detail, her outfit, makeup, and even her choice of lingerie. During the car ride, I mostly remained silent. Mary was excited because her boss, Mr. Larson, was going to receive an award. Perhaps for higher profits, or maybe for something else if the rumors were true. My anger would undoubtedly surface soon, but I knew I needed to stay composed to uncover the truth. In that moment, I understood how Bruce Banner must have felt. We arrived right on time, thanks to Mary's meticulous planning. As soon as we got there, Mary busied herself, making sure everything ran smoothly, leaving me to observe. After about 15 minutes, he entered, accompanied by his stunning wife. Why would he need Mary's help when he had such a jewel waiting for him at home? I headed to the bar, ordered a drink, and studied him closely. I noticed how people flocked to him, treating him like royalty, their behavior sycophantic as they tried to please the boss. I despised Larson. Caroline was socializing with other executives' wives, and from a distance, I observed Larson and Mary interacting. They exchanged glances, subtle touches, and genuine smiles. It was clearly more than just a typical boss-assistant dynamic. As dinner began, Larson and his wife sat at the main table, with us seated nearby. Mary strategically chose a seat across from Larson. The evening turned into a tedious banquet of awards, filled with mundane speeches and lackluster food. After dinner, the tables were cleared for dancing. I tried to keep Mary by my side, but she frequently had to help Larson with various tasks. Whenever they were together, I tried to keep an eye on them, but I was often distracted by Mary's colleagues approaching to chat, preventing me from maintaining constant vigilance. Mary and I danced a few times, both slow and fast songs, sometimes close, sometimes at a distance. As midnight approached, I grew tired and suggested we leave, and eventually, Mary agreed, albeit reluctantly. But before we left, she asked for one last dance. The dance floor was where everything unraveled for me. Mary, without her underwear, shattered my world. During the earlier dances, I could feel that she was wearing panties, but now her backside felt bare. There was no trace of the blue thong she had put on earlier. I was devastated. In all our time together, I had never known her to go without underwear. Even when I had asked her to, she had always refused. But somehow, she had done it for him. After saying our goodbyes, we left. The drive home was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts, but for me, it was a personal hell. Once we got home, Mary hurried upstairs, mentioning something about needing a shower before bed. I mumbled something and got into bed. A few minutes later, Mary joined me, wearing her long cotton nightgown. She leaned in and whispered, "Wasn't it a wonderful night?" I pretended to be asleep. She kissed me on the cheek and turned away, her breathing soon indicating she was asleep. That's when the tears began to soak my pillow. The next morning, while I stood under the scorching streams of my shower, I believe I went through the entire spectrum of human emotions: love, hatred, fury, anguish, followed by thoughts of retribution, mixed with fleeting notions of forgiveness. I felt inadequate for not having held onto my partner's loyalty, a sense of foolishness for not detecting her deceit sooner, and finally, a sense of triumph at having uncovered the truth. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, a cacophony of thoughts echoing within me. By the end of the shower, anger had prevailed. He would face consequences somehow. In the following days, I searched for ways to make him suffer for his transgressions against my marriage. Murder wasn't an option, and I doubted my ability to ambush him with a lead pipe to the knees. There had to be another way. I recognized Mary's complicity in this disaster. She had betrayed me, violated her vows of fidelity. I reflected on our shared history, questioning where I had gone wrong and what had led to her loss of respect. When did it happen? Had she given into his wealth and influence? I had placed my trust in her, invested years of my life because I believed in her, years that I would never get back. Both of them would face retribution. A few days later, the solution revealed itself. Mary had gone to the mall, supposedly to buy new shoes, or so she said. However, her laptop was on the counter, offering an opportunity. If I could infiltrate her company's system, maybe I could exact my revenge. Given my expertise in cybersecurity, hacking their system seemed within reach. I turned on her laptop, connected to her work network, and waited for the password prompt. Knowing Mary, her password wouldn't likely be a significant challenge. However, before I made my first attempt, I noticed her planner nearby. Married to a cybersecurity expert, surely Mary wouldn't violate the cardinal rule of password security, right? I flipped through the pages of the planner, locating the section under P where, as expected, her password was clearly written. As I explored further, I stumbled upon a treasure trove, not only her login credentials but also Larson's, along with credit card numbers, bank accounts, dates of birth, and social security numbers. I quickly made a trip to Kinko's to photocopy every page of her planner, reserving further exploration of her system for another time. A few days later, another opportunity arose. Mary left her computer unattended on the counter as she went out. Seizing the moment, I turned it on and accessed her account using her password. Given her position as the assistant to the vice president, she had almost unrestricted access to everything: payroll, purchases, accounting, and much of the production systems. As I navigated through the email system, I resisted the temptation to delve into Mary's personal correspondence. I had no desire to intrude on the details of her personal affairs, especially while I was struggling to keep my composure. I was convinced there had to be a way to get my revenge hidden within this labyrinth of data. My attention was drawn to the accounting system, which, to my surprise, was quite rudimentary and lacked robust security measures. Perhaps this was the key to my revenge. Similarly, a glance at the purchasing system revealed a process where invoices required approval before payment, a potential vulnerability. The plan crystallized in my mind: alter approved invoices, redirect funds to Larson's account, and wait for the inevitable discovery by the auditors. It was a stroke of genius. Larson's reputation would be tarnished, Mary would lose her job, and their illicit affair would come to an abrupt end. The next day, I executed my plan meticulously. Using the details from Mary's planner, I created accounts in Larson's name at 2 different banks in the city. Armed with this information, all that was left was to access Mary's computer to finalize the transfer. The next day, while Mary was at the gym, I took action. I used Larson's password to log in and went straight to the accounting system. There, I located an invoice that included a section for a manufacturer rebate. I entered a 3% rebate along with Larson's bank details in the routing field, thinking that such a small percentage wouldn't raise immediate suspicion. I repeated the process with another invoice, directing the rebate to a different bank account. After logging out of the system, I poured myself a drink, this time opting for good whiskey. The first sip was a toast to my well-executed plan, while the second was to help me cope with the thoughts of my failing marriage. I waited a few days, but nothing changed. No police visits, no newspaper headlines, absolutely nothing. Damn. Maybe the plan was solid, but not grand enough. So, seizing another opportunity, I accessed Mary's computer again, made some adjustments to more invoices, and logged out quickly. Still, nothing. Perhaps increasing the rebate to 4% would do the trick. The next day, I infiltrated the system again, adding a 4% rebate to 2 invoices, then logged out quickly. Life at home was tense. I had stopped initiating intimacy with Mary, and she never initiated it with me either. I found solace in staying up late, absorbed in watching the Bulls or any other game that was on TV. With cable, there was always a game that captivated me. Mary commented on my newfound interest in sports. I explained that these games were significant and that everyone at work followed them closely. It was incredibly difficult for me to even make physical contact with Mary. The thought that she had given what was once mine to someone else made me feel dizzy. After a hug or a quick kiss, I often found myself rushing to the nearest bathroom, overcome with nausea. Then, things took a turn the next day at work. Bob called me into his office and explained that the company wanted me to go to New York to update the security systems at the branch office. I was baffled. They specifically asked for you. They need you to fly out on Monday and return on Friday to update all the workstations and servers at the New York office. But Bob, that's not my job. I handle software updates. Why me? Bob shrugged. I don't know. I tried to explain that, but they insisted it had to be you. Suddenly, it dawned on me, my wife's lover wanted me out of the picture for a few days, presumably so they could spend quality time together. Resigned, I accepted. All right, Bob. I'll go. Thanks. I've never seen the company make such demands before, and I hope this isn't a trend. He handed me the plane tickets, and as I took them, I realized this was just the beginning. As long as Larson was out of jail, this nonsense would continue. I resolved to escalate my revenge plan. Later that night, Mary and I sat down for dinner. The atmosphere at home had changed recently. I had been struggling to contain my frustration, and she had been avoiding intimacy. I had tried to initiate romantic moments, only to be rejected every time. Even though I doubted my ability to go through with it, I wanted to maintain appearances. Casually, I mentioned my upcoming trip to New York for the following week. Mary feigned sadness about my departure. It was during this conversation that she unintentionally revealed her deception. She let slip that she was excited about going to the theater next week, then quickly corrected herself, saying she meant she was going to the movies with her friends to see a chick flick. I chose to ignore the lie. My mind wandered to Larson's wife. If Mary was making excuses, surely she was doing the same. I felt the need for whiskey, using it more frequently as a numbing agent, a habit I recognized as unhealthy. Mary's involvement in this New York farce put her squarely in my crosshairs. The next day, I opened accounts in her name at 2 downtown banks. Before the weekend, I had manipulated funds into both Mary and Larson's accounts. Their downfall was imminent. I felt a change within me, a deviation from the friendly person I used to be. A darker side emerged, one I hadn't recognized before, and I wasn't sure I liked it. Frustration gripped me as I pondered why the accounting team hadn't yet detected the thefts. The trip to New York was both captivating and instructive, but the flight was unpleasant. I hate flying. Since 9/11, air travel has become exhausting due to heightened security measures, resulting in long wait times and fatigue upon arrival. This trip followed the same pattern. Once I reached the hotel, I immediately retreated to rest. The next day, I promptly took care of the office tasks, completing the updates by 2 p.m. However, the rest of the trip was consumed with troubleshooting, addressing issues like frayed cables, faulty graphics cards, and a failed hard drive. Ultimately, it felt like a waste of time, fueling my frustration with the affair between Mary and Larson. On Tuesday night, I found myself confined to my hotel room, except for a brief visit to the Empire State Building, until my departure on Friday. Returning home that Friday night, I greeted Mary with a quick kiss on the cheek before retreating to bed, avoiding the need for her to come up with excuses to reject my advances. The New York trip made me reconsider how this situation would unfold. What was my desired outcome? And what about Larson's wife, Caroline? In the following weeks, I had several opportunities to access Larson's system. I hoped the auditors would notice soon. The amount of money involved was substantial by now. Then, I was sent to Denver. Bob informed me that the New York office had been pleased with my work and wanted a similar effort in Denver. Bob seemed as perplexed as I was about the assignment. Upon arriving in Denver, I encountered the same situation. I spent a couple of days on basic system security training, and the rest of the time holed up in my hotel room. While using Mary's computer, I accessed the fraudulent accounts belonging to the lovers. Collectively, they held over $1 million. It seemed inevitable that Mary and I would get divorced. Then, I wondered, would this money be considered shared property? I chuckled to myself. However, in the days that followed, thoughts about the money persisted. If I sued Larson, I could probably claim a substantial sum. Or I could just take this money and consider it justified. I wrestled with the implications. Was I trading one unethical act for an illegal one? Was I capable of such actions? But they had destroyed my life, emasculated me. Was I thinking clearly? Let's go for it. A week later, I was sent to Miami, but this time I had a plan. I completed all the security updates on Tuesday and flew to the Bahamas on Wednesday morning. It was fairly simple to open a bank account in Larson's name there. I made another trip to Grand Cayman and opened an account in Mary's name. I returned to Miami just in time for my return flight and arrived home completely exhausted. I went straight to bed and didn't wake up until midday on Saturday. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to Boston. Although the logistics posed some challenges, I managed to find time for a detour to Zurich to open a couple of accounts. When I returned home, I began the process of transferring funds to these offshore accounts, occasionally moving money between accounts at different intervals. This routine persisted over the following months. About every 3 weeks, I was sent on seemingly pointless missions to cities like Seattle, Phoenix, and Atlanta. During a trip to Phoenix, I took the opportunity to extend my stay in Mexico City to set up another offshore account. At home, I routinely accessed Larson's accounting system, adjusting invoices and redirecting funds through local banks before sending them abroad. The intricacies of planning and executing these maneuvers became a source of comfort amid the chaos. Meanwhile, my relationship with Mary had deteriorated to that of mere roommates. Our interactions were limited to the moments when our lives intersected, as she kept her own world beyond my scrutiny. Despite my efforts to bridge the gap, our connection remained strained. Every attempt at closeness seemed to provoke arguments, often stemming from trivial matters like the arrangement of dishes in the dishwasher or the placement of a coffee cup. I couldn't shake the feeling that these disputes were deliberately manufactured to maintain distance between us. In November, I pulled off a crafty move of which I'm quite proud. I gained access to Mary's schedule and noticed a lunch appointment with Larson. As her lunch hour began, I bought a dozen roses and headed to her office. The women there admired the flowers and praised me as a thoughtful husband, but unfortunately, Mary was in a meeting, just as they were about to head out for lunch. I asked if I could leave the flowers on her desk, and they agreed. Once inside Mary's office, I quickly closed the door and sat at her desk. Logging into her computer, I made adjustments to a couple of invoices and accessed her bank account. Knowing I would leave a trail, I realized it could serve as evidence if the auditors ever found anything suspicious. Later, I repeated the process in Larson's office. While using his computer, I took the opportunity to dig deeper and found a folder containing explicit images of Mary in various poses. It hurt, though not as intensely as discovering the affair itself. I copied the folder onto a USB drive I always carried and quietly left. When I got home that night, Mary was thrilled with the roses, and I even received a favor from her as a result. Well, a favor is a favor, and I never turn one down. It turned out to be one of the most pleasant nights we'd had in a long time. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that the next day would return me to the reality of my wife, her lover, and me. About a month later, I mentioned to Mary that I was planning to enroll in a French course at the nearby community college. The classes were scheduled for Tuesday and Thursday evenings. She was visibly excited at the prospect of 2 more nights with her lover. This decision was part of my strategy to gradually disengage, and any time away from Mary alleviated some of the stress. Despite my fabricated work trips, I managed to attend the classes without difficulty. I communicated with the instructor, who was understanding, and I eventually earned a B in the course. The affair showed no signs of slowing down, and the auditors still hadn't noticed anything. I couldn't help but wonder how these individuals managed to be so successful. Then I remembered Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, but that's irrelevant. I had a feeling that things were coming to a head soon. Mary's company needed to close their financial records before the end of the fiscal year, which included tracking any missing money, and they managed to do just that while I was away on a trip. Mary called me in a panic. I was relaxing by the hotel pool in Los Angeles when I received her call. She mentioned an ongoing audit and that she would be delayed, advising me not to try to contact her that night. Calmly, I sipped my banana daiquiri and reassured her, "Of course, dear, good luck." Quickly, I put my exit plan into action. I transferred the funds to an account in Mexico and caught a flight there. I withdrew all the money in bearer bonds and secured them. Mary called again later, asking me to come home soon. I told her I was still busy with security matters, but would try to be back by Thursday. I ordered another round of drinks and smiled to myself. It seemed like the storm had finally arrived. The next day, online news outlets reported their arrests. The headlines proclaimed, "Top executive and lover involved in large-scale fraud." The accompanying photos were unflattering. The report revealed that funds had been diverted from multiple accounts for personal use by the lover. It also mentioned that investigators had traced some of the money to the Cayman Islands and planned to collaborate with local authorities to access the accounts. Bail was set at $1 million each. When I returned home on Thursday night, I was at the courthouse early Friday morning. I used our house as collateral for Mary's bail, and by 2 p.m., she was released into my custody. We drove home in silence, with Mary's sobs being the only sound. Once we arrived, she hurried upstairs, muttering something about needing a shower to wash off the smell of jail. Memories flooded my mind of a similar rush to the shower after last year's awards dinner. I poured myself a whiskey and waited downstairs. A few minutes later, Mary came down, dressed in a long bathrobe. Sitting across from me, she clarified that she was innocent and hadn't taken any money. She remained silent about the affair, neither confirming nor denying it. I refrained from addressing the issue, suggesting it might be a misunderstanding and assuring her I would hire a lawyer to contest it. The atmosphere at home became cold as we awaited the trial. Mary spoke little, avoiding any mention of Larson. My routine continued monotonously, going to work, returning home, nothing more. Larson chose to fight the charges alongside Mary, occasionally meeting with her lawyer. Beyond that, Mary rarely left the house. If her affair continued, I didn't know. However, I did learn that Larson's wife, Caroline, was seeking a divorce. Mary made efforts to be kind to me, typically having dinner prepared when I returned home, though she never mentioned Larson or the previous year. I assumed she was trying to bury the past and salvage our relationship. She made a couple of attempts to seduce me, which I accepted. I kept track of the case through the newspapers while going about my life. According to reports, federal authorities had traced the money from the Cayman Islands to Zurich and then to Mexico, but they lost the trail there. Despite their efforts, no funds had been recovered. I half expected the police to show up and arrest me, but so far, nothing had happened. As the trial approached, Mary made more efforts to please me, but it was too late. I consulted a divorce lawyer and prepared the paperwork. The trial itself was brief, lasting only 3 days. By then, the media had moved on to other scandals, forgetting about this one. During the trial, Mary and Larson sat on opposite ends of the defense table, separated by their lawyers. I attended all 3 days, listening as the auditors detailed the crime and traced the money. The prosecution built a solid case, linking the transactions to Mary and Larson's computer logins. Though the defense argued that their passwords could have been hacked, the prosecution managed to tie the transactions to their devices. It was clear they were both in trouble. The prosecution painted Larson as controlling and manipulative, while portraying Mary as an unwitting accomplice. I think the jury found their arguments convincing. After 3 days, the jury retired to deliberate the verdict. Mary and I found a small meeting room and sat down. I was anxious to close this chapter. I pulled the divorce papers from my pocket, citing irreconcilable differences as the reason. Mary accepted them with a heavy heart, thinking I intended to cite adultery. Mary quickly interrupted, but that was never proven. I have evidence, I responded, pulling a handful of photographs from my pocket. I handed her the first one in the stack, which showed Caroline and me on top of the Empire State Building. I'm not accusing you of adultery, I confessed, but of myself. I went on, last year, on the night of the awards dinner, Larson's wife, Caroline, came to my office. She had hired a private investigator to follow her husband and had evidence of his infidelities. At first, I dismissed her claims, refusing to believe them, until I saw them together that night at the dinner. It confirmed her suspicions, and I was devastated. Later, I emailed her to apologize. When Larson sent me to New York with you, I realized the true purpose of the trip, for the two of you to be together. I wondered how you managed to get Caroline out of the city. To my surprise, she showed up at my hotel room door one Tuesday night. We spent the evening drinking wine, sharing our pain, and uncovering the extent of Larson's deceit. Caroline revealed that her phone calls about my trip had been recorded by the private investigator. She offered to leave the city to visit her mother before Larson had to make up an excuse. Our time in New York was mostly spent confined to the hotel room, aside from a visit to the Empire State Building, where Caroline played the role of tour guide. Despite what you may think, Caroline and I maintained strict boundaries and did not engage in any physical contact during that time. I handed over some additional photos. They showed Caroline and me together. One was taken in Denver. She had replayed some of the recordings of you and your partner, most of which were in persuading you to cut off intimacy with me. That's when I finally understood why our intimate life had withered. Over a bottle of whiskey, Caroline and I found comfort in each other's arms. Caroline and I weren't in love. We were simply two lost souls united by the actions of our partners. Together, we tried to heal the wounds inflicted by Larson and you. I spread out more photos of Caroline and me, taken in Seattle, Phoenix, and Boston. These images captured Caroline and me enjoying the sights and locations that Mary and I had once discussed visiting. By then, we had become good friends, friends with benefits, I mentioned. Then, I presented the photos from Miami, showing Caroline in a bikini, looking stunning. There was also another girl in the pictures. That other girl you see is a close friend of Caroline's. Remember when I mentioned my fantasy of being with two girls at once? Well, let me tell you, it lived up to all expectations. Mary was devastated, tears filling her eyes. I felt sorry too. If only she had confessed her indiscretions earlier, maybe we could have worked through it. If she had approached me long ago, expressing her desire to end our marriage for Larson, I would have been hurt but not as shattered as I am now. I regret the entire situation. As I got up to leave, I said goodbye. Goodbye, Mary. I once loved you, and with that, I walked out. By the time the verdict was announced, I had finished packing everything. Both were found guilty. Since the funds weren't recovered, Larson received a 7-year sentence, and Mary was sentenced to 3 years in prison and 2 years of probation. My lawyer had the authority to sell the house and its remaining contents. I instructed him to pack up all of Mary's belongings and store them in a unit. The proceeds from the house were to be placed in an escrow account for Mary, along with half of our savings. By midnight, I was on a flight to France. While standing on my balcony, overlooking the Côte d'Azur, I could see the beach from my vantage point, though it was 3 blocks away. I walked there almost every day. As I enjoyed a fine bottle of wine, I reflected on that particular year. Since moving to the south of France, I hadn't returned to the United States for over a year, not since the verdict. I had no contact with Mary. I found myself becoming a solitary figure here in Machete. I call it that, though in reality, it's just a modest house. Still, it belongs to me. Caroline has visited a few times, but our connection will never go beyond being friends with benefits, although the benefits are quite enjoyable. Once, her friend joined us, and the experience was even more pleasant the second time around. Caroline's divorce went smoothly, and she'll bring joy to some lucky bachelor as long as he can get past her trust issues. She knew about my plan to settle things with Larson and Mary and found it fitting for both. Satisfied with her life, she's moved on. As for me, I have my own challenges. While I don't need to work because of my ill-gotten gains, I've started a small online business. I develop software for system integration, similar to what I did for Bob. I can manage everything remotely and have secured a few contracts to keep myself busy. I even received an email from Bob acknowledging my work and offering to refer me to some clients. I expressed my gratitude. The ladies at the bakery find my attempts to speak French amusing and try to teach me new words each day. I suppose I'll master it by the time I'm 100 years old. I've made progress in dealing with the betrayal from Mary and our divorce, but I'm struggling more with rationalizing my own choices. I remember studying a case during my psychology class in college. It detailed the disappearance of a husband who resurfaced years later. According to the case, he disappeared after leaving work one day. He lived in the San Francisco Bay Area with his wife and 2 young children. His early departure from work coincided with a World Series game between the Oakland Athletics and the San Francisco Giants. The case study recounted how, as he left his workplace, the Loma Prieta earthquake struck. He narrowly escaped death as bricks and debris fell on either side of him. In that moment, he realized the gravity of the situation, which jolted him into self-awareness. Reflecting on his life, he recognized his deep unhappiness and the unfulfilled desires he harbored. Without saying a word, he hastily packed and left his wife and children. About 4 years later, authorities found the man, who had since established a happy marriage and had a child. Upon his arrest, he underwent a psychological evaluation. The psychiatrist concluded that the man's near-death experience had profoundly altered his perspective. He began to see the world as inherently precarious, with the constant threat of mortality looming. Consequently, he abandoned his obligations and fled. However, over time, he gradually realized, at a subconscious level, that he no longer lived in a reality where death lurked around every corner. Eventually, he returned to his previous life, resuming his role as a happily married family man. Maybe that's my reality too. When I was in love and could trust those I cared for, I upheld integrity and honesty. Taxes were filed accurately, lies were absent, and thoughts of others never interfered. Mary was my everything, my love for her was absolute. But the agony of losing a loved one, especially through betrayal, cuts deeper. It's a pain that embeds itself in the soul and constricts the heart. With the sudden shift in my world, I transformed into someone unrecognizable. I'm not pleased that this version of me exists inside. Now, I face decisions. Should I remain isolated, protecting my soul from the darker aspects within me, or cautiously allow others back into my life, gradually reintroducing the better side of myself to the world? The answer eludes me. However, that little blonde girl at the bakery catches my attention. Story 2. My ex and I were lovers from our university days. The first time we met was during our second lecture as freshmen, and we sat beside each other. We were both young teenagers with heads full of dreams, and I always wanted a partner I could share my dreams and life with. I know this might sound childish, but what really attracted me to my ex-wife was her handwriting. At first glance, they looked like they were well crafted by an artist, and I was stunned to see someone my age with such perfect handwriting. She, on the other hand, was an absolute beauty. I didn't just fall in love with her handwriting that day. I fell in love with her ocean blue eyes, blonde hair tumbling over her shoulders, and a smile that could light up a small city. Typically, I wasn't the kind of guy who made friends quickly. I was more reserved and waited for friends to come to me, and we'd build a relationship from there. But I had to make an exception with her. We started talking in the lecture hall that day, and with time, we became seat buddies, always sitting next to each other. It was great to make a new friend in college, and we got along very well. Since we were both freshmen and didn't know our colleagues or have any friends, we decided to stick together until we became inseparable. My ex-wife and I became best friends, and we didn't start dating until our 3rd year. The reason I delayed in asking her out was that we were so close, and I was afraid she would turn me down if I did. But I didn't know I was making a mistake because other guys were beginning to ask her out, and she would tell me about them. At that point, I could not hold it in anymore, and I figured it was better to be turned down than to shy away. So I asked her out, and she said yes. As soon as she said yes, I asked her to move in with me, and she did, and our love story officially began. I loved her more than I loved myself, even as a student who was only earning a little from my part-time job. I did everything to make her happy. We went to parties and concerts and had fun together. Almost all of our colleagues knew we were dating, and they always found us together. Every time we stepped out together, people could easily tell we were together because of how I looked after her, and some would even ask how long we had been dating because they loved what they saw. Aside from being fun and pleasure partners, We were study partners and helped each other until we graduated from the university. Our parents knew we were together and respected our decision to live with each other. After we graduated from the university, I was lucky to get a good-paying job, but my ex-wife wasn't. We both applied to the same places, but for some reason, she kept getting rejection emails which took its toll on her. I even helped her write and edit her resume, but she wouldn't get hired even if she got to the interview level. We thought it was normal for that to happen, and it would only be for a couple of months, so we went ahead and got married. The wedding was beautiful but small, and we had support from friends and family. After we got married, we moved out of the studio apartment we both lived in and rented a bigger 2-room apartment. I was the one who single-handedly paid rent and took care of all the bills, even groceries. I understood that she wasn't working then and didn't want to do one of those hourly menial jobs, so she wouldn't get comfortable with it. And since we were not financially stable, we agreed to only have kids once we both had jobs that could sustain us and a child. Even with my new job, we still spent quality time with each other since the job allowed me to work 2 weeks on site and 2 weeks remotely. Despite my responsibilities at home, I didn't stop making her feel special. On my way back from work, I'd still stop to get her flowers, shop for her, buy her a piece of new jewelry or a bag, or even get her chocolates. I did all of that because I didn't want her to feel the impact of not having a job yet, and I also wanted her to know that I was happy doing all of the things I did, even though it meant I'd have nothing left to save at the end of the month. 1 year passed, and my ex-wife still did not get the kind of job she wanted. But she kept applying to different organizations. It was in the 11th month that she began to do small menial jobs that didn't pay well, and she reluctantly agreed to do that after I had talked to her over and over. Even with her 1 month of working, I didn't let her contribute a penny to house bills. I preferred that she kept the money for herself so she could get whatever she wanted and be happy. We were always happy and doing things together at home. We cooked, had our bath, and even went for evening walks and roadside ice cream hunting together. Our bond grew stronger. But one day I discovered something that broke my heart. That day I was at home working, and she was doing the day shift at a fancy restaurant she worked for when she called me and asked me to help her find her physical resume so she could use it to apply for a job opening. As soon as she returned home, I confirmed the job opening to be accurate. Knowing how much our lives would change if she got a job at that organization, I left what I was doing and went to help her find her resume. She had instructed me that I would find it in the first document holder in a box she kept her documents in. But after going through all the pages in that document folder, I couldn't find her resume. Because of that, I had to take out all of the document holders and go through them one after the other. Immediately, I carried the third document holder to search for her resume. Small-sized notes and cards fell out of it. I was curious to find out what they were. I felt my chest tighten and my lower tummy churn just by reading them. The small-sized notes and cards were exchanged between my ex-wife and one of our professors who she was really fond of back in the university. It turned out they had been having an affair for years, and no one knew about it. I didn't even suspect anything between them. I was very disappointed, and I really wanted to believe that I was having a bad dream. I found it difficult to believe that my ex-wife was also having an affair with the professor while we were together. It made sense because I kept wondering why we were always treating infections when she was my only partner. Before I packed her document holders back into the box, I took some of the notes and cards and told her I couldn't find her resume. I knew she would be back home soon, so I asked her if I could edit and print a new resume for her before she returned home, and she agreed. She sent me her laptop password shortly after our call, and I used the opportunity to go through her social media accounts since she linked them to her laptop. I found the chance between her and our former professor on Instagram, and I was even more heartbroken. I was already boiling with anger, so I plotted my own revenge. I knew she trusted me and wouldn't bother going through the resume, so I edited it so she could fail her job interview. Then I took pictures of her chat with our former professor on my phone and forwarded both pictures of their chats and the notes to our university. When she got home that evening, I didn't tell her anything. I just acted like I had fallen sick so I could be alone. After she submitted her resume and got an email that she was not fit for the job, I told her what I had done. She thought I was joking, but it was only until I mentioned her affair with the professor that she knew I wasn't kidding. She fell on her knees and started to beg me, but she had betrayed me, and I could not forgive her. She tried to explain that she did it for our grades, but what I read did not sound like that. So there was no way I was buying that. I kicked her out of the house that evening and notified her parents about what she had done. I had already contacted a lawyer to process our divorce papers, and we divorced when the papers were ready. As for our professor, he knew such a relationship was prohibited in our university, but he broke the rule. The university fired him, so he and my ex-wife lost in the end. She tried to come back and beg me. She even sent me multiple messages on Facebook and Instagram, but I blocked her afterward and warned her not to show up at my apartment again or else she would regret it. She never showed up again. Sadly, we were only married for 1 year, but I'm glad I found out that early because finding out later would have hurt me more. I am fine now and focusing more on my career and personal development. I was deeply hurt and betrayed, but it would take a while before I entered another relationship. The story depicts a complex situation where a couple faces betrayal and disappointment. The main character decided to break up with his ex-wife after discovering her affair with a professor. His decision to tamper with her resume and expose the affair wasn't the wisest. It's important to remember the significance of honesty and forgiveness in interpersonal relationships.